So now that recording is back on, we are really ready. Take it away. And we're very happy you're here.
Awesome. Thank you so much for giving the context on as to why I'm here today. I think that's really important to add in. But I just really want to say, welcome in. And I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen. And I just want to give a quick reminder, if I lag at any point, I can go ahead and just turn off my video, the classic Zoom situation. Lagging happens, so just let me know at any point. I'll start sharing my screen. Awesome. So this workshop is about engaging in a conversation about exploring the necessity and possibilities of financial literacy, and particularly through the tool of participatory budgeting. And so it relates to the K through 12 educational system. And in this workshop, we will be looking at financial literacy as not just a tool and a skill set, but a critical life enablement and what this means for the future of our youth. So just a couple of things. I'm sure I don't have to mention this, but if you're not talking, just stay muted and then we can have a better conversation and don't run into those awkward Zoom situations. And I also want to emphasize the point of keeping an open mind in this space. My goal in this Zoom space is to facilitate growth within not only myself, but others as well. And we cannot do this if we are not willing to listen to differing opinions. So please keep that in mind and remain respectful within that as well. All right, without further ado, let's just hop right into it. I just kind of want to go over the kind of agenda for this presentation, just so we can have a sense of what's happening next. I hate not knowing what's next in workshops, so I try to keep that in mind. So first, we'll start off with the introduction of who I am and why I'm here and my experience with financial literacy, and then some clarifications on participatory budgeting. I know Luke has already talked about what it is, but I can add a little bit of context as well, and just establishing that groundwork so we can build off from there. Then we'll move into understanding participatory budgeting, and I've broken it down into two different areas with self-thought and community thought, and what that kind of means in the framework of participatory budgeting. And then we'll move on to talking about PB in schools, which is something that Luke has already talked about, and I kind of want to talk about this from the youth perspective as a student. And next we'll have a bit of discussion time. I don't like to just talk at people, so we'll have some time to hopefully talk and discuss the ideas that I mentioned throughout this workshop. And lastly, some feedback. I believe there'll be a feedback form and we can just go from there. All right, so let's just go get started with the introduction. All right. As previously mentioned, my name is Leah Scott. I'm 17 years old, and I'm a recent graduate of Roosevelt High School located in Seattle, Washington. And I was enrolled in the Running Start program, which is a program that sets students up so in addition to being a high school junior or senior, they can take college classes. So now that I've graduated, I'm just a student at North Seattle College working towards my associate's degree. At North Seattle College, I have two different majors: political science and economics. The reason I chose these two majors is because the connection between these two fields is practically undeniable, as they used to be considered just one field, political economy. So the reason I chose these two majors is because in order to help marginalized communities, which is my main passion, I need to first understand the different factors and systems that are in place that may be positively or negatively affecting these communities. So I generally just work as a youth advocate. Those are the most of the jobs that I've had so far, and that involves a lot of community work. And so trying to establish the best ways that we can protect our youth and keep them learning and growing. And my work is often rooted in racial equity, social justice, and sustainability. And these different concepts involve having to take a critical lens to the kinds of actions we take, particularly as leaders in not only our government, but in our community as well. Throughout my time observing the kinds of leadership actions made by school districts and organizations, I have seen many decisions made by leaders result in unintended consequences. And so what I find is important is to shape my critical thinking skills so I can avoid making those same mistakes. And some of the leadership roles I've had so far and the financial literacy work that I've done there, as you'll see on the screen, I've worked at the Washington NAACP Youth Council as the co-president there. And I actually got the opportunity to help set up some financial literacy lessons. So we actually had a very different tax form that we had to fill out as opposed to your classic W-2 form. So there was a lot of confusion on how this is going to work, especially when you had, I believe, our youngest member there was 14. So it was really complicated for them. So we wanted to make sure they understood that. And in this capacity, I also got the chance to write for the Seattle Times, which Luke also mentioned already, but I wrote about financial literacy there, and that was put on by the Education Lab that centers youth voices. I also worked at, and I'm currently still working at North Seattle College as the student body president there. And I'm working with college administration to implement a financial literacy curriculum. And participatory budgeting is actually somewhat already implemented there on a basic level. And I'll be talking more about that. And it's called the Student Fee Board, but I'll get more in depth about that later. Lastly, I have a position at Seattle City government, which is the Seattle Youth Commission, and I'm the co-chair there. And this position just involves working for the government. And here I plan to work on financial literacy and exploring why it is it hasn't been implemented in our school district. So a lot of work there on that. And as you'll see here, I have had a lot of leadership positions, and these are just only about half of them. But those are the ones I found to be most important and relevant. But I found myself in many different jobs. And at one point, I did have 2 jobs, which are the NAACP Youth Council and North Seattle College. And I just recently got hired at a second one, so I'm back to having 2 jobs again, one at Starbucks and the other at North Seattle College. And in my first time having 2 jobs, I found myself having more than a steady amount of income, yet unaware of the possibilities of it. Like many, when they get their first job, I thought of all the things that I wanted to buy that my parents wouldn't want me to, like candy, new technology, just all these things that I just wanted to have. And what I didn't fully grasp at the time is that there was more to money than buying the things that I immediately wanted. And this got me into the lifelong dilemma of wants versus needs. And so I often found myself staring at my bank account and said, this is great, but what can I do with this money? What can I do to essentially maximize my profits? And so this is what really got me into talking about financial literacy and the importance of it. It is because I was experiencing a roadblock in my own ability that I turned to our educational system and wondered why they never really prepared me for this. This really segued me into writing my article about financial literacy and how Seattle Public Schools in specific failed to teach students about how to be financially literate. This issue is one that expands far beyond the structure of Seattle Public Schools, as I'm sure many of you can attest to the fact that in school you weren't taught how to balance a checkbook, how to invest, and maintain a good credit score. And if you were really lucky, because I know many people who never were taught that. Failing to teach financial literacy is a problem that reaches across school district lines, state lines, and is a predicament that is setting our students up for a tougher life than necessary. Financial literacy is a critical life enablement because in a world that values currency, loan approvals, and debt management, if you don't know how to do these things, then you are set up for a really tough ride. So if you want to hear me talk more about that, then you can check out my article in the Seattle Times. And it doesn't look like I have access to the chat with all these many screens I have in front of me. But Luke, if you want to put the link in the chat, feel free. But moving away from that, I wanted to actually have just an introduction and conversation with you all. I would like to hear, why are you here today? What interests you about participatory budgeting? And not everyone may get the chance to introduce yourselves, but we'll just take a couple minutes to do that, and feel free to unmute or type in the chat why are you here in this workshop and at this event and any other relevant information. So. I know a couple people here, and I don't want to call you out, but feel free to step up.
My name is Anna. I'm here. I was invited by Leah. I personally, I find economics to be really interesting. I had economics was my highest grade this last year. With my first semester, I had 107% because I kept writing essays on the little discussion boards. But I think that financial literacy is most definitely the most important class that any high schooler will be taking, because, you know, it's basically what's setting you up for success in the future. Like, if you don't have a grasp on that, then you're going to have trouble grasping, you know, the steps to a solid future. So, yeah, I think that this is, you know, definitely a, thank you. Definitely a conversation that needs to be had. And, you know, yeah, that's all.
Thank you so much for sharing. Is there anyone else that wants to introduce themselves? That's all right. We'll have plenty of other opportunities to discuss and engage with each other, but feel free to type in the chat anything that you would want to share about yourself. With that, we can actually move on to a different section in this presentation. So just some clarifications about financial literacy and participatory budgeting. So before we dive any further, I just want to establish some basic information. And if you're in this workshop today, it's likely that you already know some of this, but I just want to make sure that we are all at the same kind of level, and then we can build off from there. So just some basic definitions. Financial literacy is the possession of a set of skills and knowledge that allows an individual to make well-informed and effective decisions about their financial resources. And to be financially literate is just to know how to manage your own finances. And this means learning how to pay your bills, how to borrow, how to save, all these different aspects. And I just saw that Taylor just typed in the chat and introduced herself, and I'm really glad that you could do that. Thank you so much. Participatory budgeting is just a process of democratic deliberation, and that involves a lot of decision making and allocating resources. And specifically, we're going to be talking about our educational system. And so in this context, we're having students actually talking with each other and their peers and deciding where they want these resources to go and what things they want to prioritize. And so participatory budgeting is meant to bring people together and to decide where they want to allocate these resources and facilitate community building and growth in the process. Are there any questions on that? Awesome. All right, getting into the good stuff. All right, so this section is just the basic principles of participatory budgeting and how the concepts of self and community play into it. And I'm seeing a lot more people typing in the chat and introducing yourselves, so it's nice to see you all. All right, so here I have some basic principles of participatory budgeting, and feel free to read through them as I'm talking, but I've highlighted in red the ones that I found to be most prominent to really focus on for our youth.
Just to check, are you advancing your slides? Because I still see the introduction slide.
Oh, you do?
Yeah. So I'm not sure if we're aligning on your slides, and we should check that.
All right. I will see if I can redo my share on my screen.
All right. Oh, Kemi said the same thing in chat. Thanks, Kemi.
Technical difficulties.
It's always it's technical stuff. It's challenging.
All right.
There you go. I see principles of
participatory
budgeting.
All right. You're seeing the screen right? Awesome. Okay, so now you'll see on the screen that I have various different amounts of principles of participatory budgeting. And as I'm just kind of talking through them, feel free to just read through them. And I've highlighted in red which ones I found to be most important to youth. So you'll see local ownership and involvement, representative democracy, civic engagement, empowerment, accessibility, transparency, and community building. But yet the ones I would like to focus on the most here are community building, transparency, and mutual responsibility. So community building is one that I find to be really important and is essential to our youth. So because it provides a more positive environment, learning is a lifelong process and difficult as well. If there is a tool out there that can bring our youth together and keep them strong, then I believe we should use it. As we have seen throughout history, people organizing and collectively agreeing on a specific course of action to take is a lot stronger than just one individual. So, instilling a sense of community and belonging can have a great impact on the values that our youth hold as they grow up. And if they find that they belong within the space and trust others, they are more likely to invest back in the community. And normalizing and encouraging that is going to be crucial for community development. So, in participatory budgeting, you have to learn how to work with people. And in the process, you get to know more people and their values than ever before. And this kind of information and relationship building is invaluable and should be strived towards in our educational system. Community building is something that I've seen really lack in our educational system. Often we've seen youth be distant from not only their peers, but also the people who are supposed to be their supervisors, their teachers, their mentors. Often our community is very separated, especially in the educational system I've seen, it's very divided. And if we can use this tool of participatory budgeting to bring our community together to really talk about the things that need to happen, I think that we should definitely use it. So another one is transparency. And transparency is a skill that I believe most can agree that we should be seeing more of, especially in our government, leadership, local, state, and federal. And in time of misinformation and deception, I believe that it is imperative that we raise our youth to appreciate the usefulness and practicality of transparency. In participatory budgeting, there is no room for secrecy or deception. When you are sitting at a table with others, you are attempting to figure out the most fine details of where these resources should go. And you have a personal connection to it, and everyone does, because this is their money. And when it's your money, you tend to care a lot more. And so that deepens the discussion even more. Mutual responsibility is another one I would like to talk about. When students are at the table, allocating these resources is really a decent amount of responsibility on their shoulders, and they have to consider these many different things. What kind of approach are they going to take? How are they going to allocate these resources? Where are they going to? And what's really important to understand is that students aren't going to be doing this alone. And that's one thing that when I was initially introduced to participatory budgeting, I was concerned this was going to be way too much responsibility. I'm scared. How am I going to do all of this stuff? It's overwhelming. But what's important to understand is that students aren't going to be deciding all of this on their own. They're going to be working together in a classroom and going to have that teacher with them to support and aid them through it. And that really goes back to my first point of community building. Not only are they going to be working with their peers, but their staff and the district are going to be like all over this because it's their money. They're going to be like, where is this going? How are we going to decide on this? So it really brings people together. So the burden doesn't really rest not only solely on a student's shoulders, but rather on everyone. It is responsibility for each individual to do their part to participate and contribute to getting it done. And within this, students will get to learn what it is like to be responsible for some of the things and what responsibility means, not just in paper, but in action as well. So this may be a similar experience for everyone else, but in my K-8 school, they had just plastered everywhere the core values of the school: respect, responsibility, caring, all this stuff. And they really emphasized that point, but they never really talked about what it looked like in action. And so what participatory budgeting does, and it takes these core values of respect, responsibility, and all these different things and puts them in action. And you are actually talking with people and getting to develop those skills. So I believe that participatory budgeting covers most, if not all, of these core values. And if it were to be implemented, then I would have came out of that school with a deeper understanding of what these values mean in practice. And that's the purpose of our educational system in general, to make sure that our students are not just being crammed with information, but they are retaining it and they are able to actually use these skills to their advantage, because skills like responsibility and being able to communicate well with others are ones that we use every day. Are there any questions about these principles and how they fit into participatory budgeting?
No, really, but it's very interesting to hear your point of view.
Thank you. Awesome. And I just want to note, just because I didn't go in depth about all of these different principles doesn't mean that they aren't important. For example, youth empowerment is very, very important. So when we give youth a sense of responsibility or agency in their own learning experience and environment, it provides them with a sense of power and control in their own community and what they want to see within it. So not only this, but it makes them feel a deeper connection to their community as well. And that's so important. And kids tend to think of things, you know, so creative, as Luke was saying. Like, there's so many things that would shock you that youth would think of. And I've seen this many times throughout my career as a youth advocate. Youth tend to think of the most creative things, and one thing I can really think of is ethnic studies has been trying to be implemented in my local school district for so long, and they know what they want. Youth know what they need to see in their schools. It's just a matter of talking with the adults to get it done. So that's one thing that I've seen. And that's just the principles of participatory budgeting. And I've created kind of a just a diagram to show what I mean when I say moving from self-thought to community thought. Because what I've seen in participatory budgeting is that it's not just about you and your own needs, but also talking with others and engaging with them and hearing them of what they need. Because participatory budgeting is an engaging process that requires you to not only bring yourself to the table, but for others to, for you to listen to others as well. So as you'll see, it's kind of an inverted pyramid, and self is at the bottom because it's kind of just you here. It's your own thoughts, your own values, and your own positionality here, and your agenda coming into the participatory budgeting space. And next is kind of the developmental stage where you're moving away from that self-thought and starting to see these different perspectives in participatory budgeting. And what is critical to understand about participatory budgeting is that it is not only about you and your own needs, which I've already talked about as well. But once you've really started to understand that having that kind of approach, I'm working towards something that is bigger than just myself, then you'll be able to get to that community mindset, which is what I believe is ideal in a participatory budgeting space. So kind of once at the top of this kind of pyramid, you will find yourself more invested in not only others' interests, but how this may compare and reflect your own. So what is important to understand about the concepts of self and community is that they are two heavily intertwined concepts, and there's no separating yourself from a community or vice versa. A community is made of several individuals and their own identities, and they combine together to make a space where everyone can live and coexist. And in the end, when you have really opened your mind to different possibilities and perspectives, you will help create a more positive and open environment for people to learn and grow within. And I think that's something that's really critical for our youth as well, to have that positive learning environment where they can really open themselves up and be their authentic selves. So that's just kind of the ways I like to think of how to understand participatory budgeting and coming into the participatory budgeting space. And I quickly just want to emphasize the point that when I say moving away from self-thought, I don't necessarily mean that you should move away from just thinking about yourself in the participatory budgeting space. Bringing your most authentic self to the table and what you bring to it and your own ideas is what makes participatory budgeting so effective. Having all those different perspectives in the room and really talking and really trying to figure out what's best for the community. All right. Are there any questions on what I mean by self versus community? Because it is a bit more complicated on this.
Nope.
All right. Feel free to type anything in the chat. I can't see it, so just let me know if I miss anything in the chat. Awesome. All right, so we can move on to participatory budgeting in our school system. So kind of participatory budgeting involves contextually teaching math, and it has the potential to really take an innovative approach to teaching math in our schools. And we're kind of looking at these different questions like, how are we going to allocate these resources, of course, and what percentage are we going to give? And all these basic math concepts can be implemented and taught through participatory budgeting. So it's not just an add-on, but it's something that can be woven into the curriculum and really smoothly done so as well. So I believe the possibilities of participatory budgeting in curriculum is vast. And I just want to know, I am not a math teacher, but I guarantee you if I talk to one, actually, I just recently did, and they were like, that is a brilliant idea because it fits in so well to the basic math concepts we're already trying to teach. And more innovative ways to do so is always a way better thing to go about. So financial literacy is also apparent within this because when you are contextually teaching math, you are allowing these youth to be exposed to these real life scenarios early on. So later down the road, when they do run into those problems or those real life scenarios, it isn't a surprise to them. And that's one thing that I talked a lot about in my article is these real life scenarios of having to balance my budget. Where am I going to get this money? How am I going to do this? How am I going to do that? I ran into those constant roadblocks a lot because I wasn't taught this. So this shouldn't come as a surprise to our youth. And that is the whole goal with financial literacy and being financially literate. So, and along with that, by practicing participatory budgeting, it actually helps to facilitate growth in our youth, and not only on the values that I mentioned earlier about transparency, community building, and responsibility, but also just in general, they will learn to be more engaged civically, which is also quite important to instill that in our youth earlier on, so they know the value of their own voice. Something that I've seen as a youth advocate is students don't really know that their voice is that powerful, because as a youth advocate, I believe that students are the center of an educational system. They are the backbone of it, and they are the ones that can shape it and should shape it the way it needs to be for them. So participatory budgeting is that main tool that can really change and transform an educational system to something that can be a lot more tailored to what they want and need. All right. So I believe that financial literacy has really helped me further understand and develop some of the skills that I've talked about today with mutual responsibility. I previously talked a bit about my role at North Seattle College, and I kind of want to go back to that and talk about the student fee board, which is kind of a process that has been implemented that simulates participatory budgeting on a smaller scale. So this role really helped me to further understand what it means to work together as a team and to really set up and step up and navigate the responsibilities that I've been given. So just to kind of give like a structural overview of how the student fee board worked. So how it worked is that we had a chair and I was the co-chair of it. And so we had a set amount of money, as you would for any participatory budgeting scenario, and we had a set amount of money that were called S&A fees, and they were student funded fees, and people would give us proposals. They would come to us and they would ask us for money, essentially, and we had to prioritize who we're going to give money to. And we had to really kind of think about our goals in this process as well. Who are we going to give this money to? Why? All these things, and write up a report. And this was at my college where we had students doing this, not just grown adults. We had actual students doing this, and we had them engaging in it, and it really transformed our college. And it's something that's been implemented for a while now. I believe that if we were doing that on a bigger scale with even bigger budget, we would see so many more changes in our educational system and had a bigger impact on what changes students wanted to see. So that's one thing. And in that capacity on the fee board, I was able to further develop my skills, and particularly community building, which is something I already talked about, but really got close in that space. And because we were having so many deeper discussions about where these resources should be allocated, who, what, and where we're going to prioritize things, some of the conversations held tended to be difficult. And I believe to a certain extent that that is a necessity of participatory budgeting. All of these things that are being discussed in our communities are difficult issues, and they are uncomfortable to talk about, but we need to talk about them. And that brings us closer as a community. And that's the beauty of participatory budgeting. It brings people together, brings our communities together, so we can have a bigger conversation about the problems and issues within it. So, participatory budgeting is a process that will push you to really think about your own positionality and where you are coming from, and which tremendously helps with identity finding and building. And why is the constant question of participatory budgeting? And that's what makes it so engaging and so intriguing, is because you are constantly in that learning process. And I think that's a beautiful thing, especially in that constant learning environment of a school. So are there any questions or things I can clarify on that?
Leah, there was a question I want to go back to from when you were talking about the self versus community. Eduardo asked, from your point of view, what motivates students from moving from self-focus to community?
Yeah, so in my experience, I've seen that coming into, specifically, I'm just going to talk about high school. High school students can be really selfish, and I can attest to that. And when I came to my high school, I was always thinking about all the things that, I wanted to change, all the things I would do, all the things I wanted to change within my high school. And I never really stopped to think about how others may be feeling in that process. I came into my school with a charge on what I wanted to see. And so once I really got invested in my own community and kind of talking with people, I really found myself to actually see that, community thought and community discussion is where I need to be at to have these changes in this system, because that's how we're going to have a better one. So what really motivates students from moving from self to community? I would say that realization. Just for me in that specific scenario, is that realization of my own selfishness in that case, and not really realizing what my community members felt in that scenario. But I know there's probably another student on the call that may be able to talk a bit about that if they wanted to. So hopefully does that answer your question?
Yeah, that was a great answer. Thank you. Thank you, Leah.
Awesome. I'm glad I could answer it. Are there any other questions in the chat? I can't open it for some reason.
Yeah, it's okay. You have another one here from William Pike, who is a FirstRoot intern. Do you have any other ideas about where participatory budgeting could be implemented with kids, family, sports teams, etc.?
I want to say I love that question so much, because having it implemented in a family is one of the best ways you could do it. Because I know in my family specifically, we have many different family traditions that we talk about, and having participatory budgeting just be a thing where you talk about, finances with your teenager, okay, this is the amount of money we have for this vacation. Do we want to spend it more on souvenirs? Do we want to spend it more on the good food that's over there at the restaurants, or do we want to spend it here? And having those practices at home is really going to be helpful for just being financially literate in general. So that's something that I wish I would have had when I was growing up. My parents talking to me more about all the possibilities with money and all the, constraints of it as well. So I think that having it in a family, sports teams, all that is going to be super helpful. And I think there's a variety of ways and programs you can implement it in.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Are there any other questions in the chat?
Just a note from Taylor. I've heard of successful public arts PB programming in Tacoma, Washington implemented an interesting example. Have you heard about that at all, Leah?
I have heard a bit about participatory budgeting in Tukwila, but not in Tacoma. Is there anything else in the chat?
That's it for now. I'll keep telling you if questions
Awesome.
come in.
Thank you, Rebecca. I appreciate that. Don't know why it's not letting me open the chat. All right. Just to confirm, you all are seeing the participatory budgeting in schools slide right now, right?
Yes.
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. All right. So let's go ahead and go to our next slide. So like I had said earlier on in the workshop, I don't like talking at people. So I wanted to actually have a discussion with you all and kind of trying to talk about the principles of participatory budgeting. And so I have two questions here, and we can totally veer off from those and talk about other aspects of it. So first question is, what do you find is the most important principle of participatory budgeting, and which do you believe should be taught the most to our youth? And the second one here is, do you believe that participatory budgeting belongs in our educational system? Why or why not?
I can take a stab at the second question. So I think that participatory budgeting is great, but it's not essential in the educational system. But what is essential is a good way to teach financial literacy, because obviously it's one of the, if not the most important skills to be taught to especially high schoolers and even middle schoolers and just kids in general. But right now, the way and the method it's teaching through things like lectures and like worksheets and stuff like that, it just isn't working. And I'm sure there's a bunch of data to support that. So I think that we need to find a better way to teach financial literacy. And I think that participatory budgeting actually works. So in that way, I do think that it's not essential if you could find another good way to teach financial literacy, but right now it definitely belongs.
I think for me, what the first question, I think the most important value is the transparency. I think it's like say the truth for me. You always showing the true colors, you always showing the truth about that. And one of the most important things is taught, I think it's financial literacy, because talking by about experience in Mexico, when we are grown up and try to earn our own money, and we try to spend it, like you say, I want candies, I want everything that my father don't give me, but you start to think about what I need against what I want. And I think the financial literacy is needed around the world, because in Mexico it's the same. We don't have that kind of education. And in the participatory budgeting, I think should be to a part of the educational, because we have that kind of thing for adults here in some part of the towns, and the people don't know how to manage that, how to spend that money, how to do what to do with that money, because the government say you have this money, thinking how to use it, and just spending maybe not a real thing that the town needs or the people needs in that town. Just 2 or 3 people give their opinion, and that's it. They spend the money in that, and maybe it's not the thing that all the people need in that town. I think that the budgeting, the participatory budgeting, and the financial literacy are very important for the education.
Thank you, Jessica. I see Harris has his hand raised.
Hi. Yeah, thanks a lot for this very interesting talk. I just like to add that apart from financial literacy and quantitative skills, I feel that as a core educational value, participatory budgeting brings a lot to the table. Uh, this aspect of making joint decisions, discussing with each other, deciding what is fair, what is okay with various participants. I think it's just a very good way of training people for democratic decision making in the future as well.
I totally agree with both of those comments. And I would also add that I think the agency piece of it is extremely important. I think young people, especially today with having everything at their fingertips, we expect them to know so much, but trust them so little to make wise choices. And so I think that piece of it, of participatory budgeting, specifically talking about youth, is the most like powerful piece of it to me, that sense of agency.
Yeah, I think that the agency, this is Luke talking. I think that's really quite profound, because without agency, it's just funny money. I mean, one of the things that I really can't stand is these simulations of the stock market, where they give kids money and then ask them to invest it in the stock market, where the amount of money given to the kids is outlandish relative to their actual personal experience. And the time horizon and the mechanism for investing is completely wrong. My own son went through a high school class where they gave the kids $100,000 in 3 months to see who could make the most money. Well, there's no way you're going to be responsibly investing in anything associated with creating value by seeing how much money can you make in 3 months in the stock market. So there's no opportunity for reflection when the process is done. And I think that that's one final thing I'd like to talk about, is the notion that the learning can often come after the program is implemented. So we went through the entire PB cycle, and then we actually put in what the students asked for. Then you get to ask them, how'd it go? Was it what you expected and wanted? I don't always make perfect choices with my own finances, but in the realm of making mistakes, I'd rather see our youth being given the opportunity to learn through small amounts of money so that the mistake is localized, and they can also have a teacher supporting them and other students supporting them. Hey, we thought the 3D printer would work. Oh, we got a cheap model and it broke. So what does that mean? Should we have invested more in quality? Oh, that's a pretty important life lesson. So I think that this notion of the values and this notion of agency and letting them make the choice. And then for the second question is, I absolutely believe that participatory budgeting belongs in our education system, precisely because I don't know of any other technique that covers all of the good things that you covered in your talk thus far. If there were a better technique to cover the things that you covered in your talk, I'd be advocating for that technique. I just don't think it exists. I don't think there's anything better than participatory budgeting to convey what you talked about.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to chime in and talk about, what they're thinking for these questions? I'm really appreciating all the engagement already, so I'm happy. Awesome. Well, that's what I had for that discussion session. And if you have any questions for me, we still do have about 10 minutes. So if you have any questions or anything that you'd like to just clarify or anything like that, then feel free to. Now is the time. But yeah.
Only to say thank you, Leah. This was a great talk. Yeah,
Thank
very
you.
interesting and amazing. Yeah, congrats.
Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
I think it was exactly what I had hoped for when I reached out and invited you to talk. So I'm it's more than what I was hoping for. I thought the connection from self to community was really powerful. So for me, that was something I snagged and tweeted. I just thought the way that you brought that in was really compelling.